with you. If and as John points out, it's by Zoom. I look forward to a future time we can all be together, but it has also allowed many of us to be together who maybe wouldn't have been able to travel. And so I'm pleased to be with you this evening and to share some of my thoughts that are my current thinking in terms of the challenges we have as a society, St. Vincent de Paul, and what we can be working on in the weeks and months ahead. So I'm going to share a bit of my screen with you here. Just give me a second here. Okay, assume you can see me. If not, please throw something up in the chat. So the title of the presentation this evening, I'm calling Building a Network with Capacity to Serve. And that network is based on certainly on our mission statement that we are a network of friends inspired by gospel values, growing in holiness and building a more just world through personal relationships with and service to people in need. So at the heart of who we are is we're a network of friends, and we're trying to live out our individual vocations through this society, this vocation that we have. Part of the reason I have wanted to talk on this capacity issue springs from what's in the news for all of us. And I want to spend a little time talking about what we all see in the news, and all of us are certainly working or concerned about. And this conversation I've been having with almost every meeting that I've gone to, and that is how the society is responding to the situation in Ukraine. And it's been an interesting set of back and forths that I have in my position. I'm also on the International Board of Directors, and my particular area of responsibility is with solidarity and special projects, which includes relief for situations like this. And so I want to give a little report because it's been on many people's minds, and we get a lot of calls in St. Louis at the national office about this. But the current situation is that we all actually had known in the news, but the current situation in terms of the society is that we have a very weak presence in the Ukraine. And one of the things that's interesting is that they've struggled with a lot of issues of governance even in Ukraine, which now when things come to a head and they are needed, the network is not there. And not only is the network not there, it's also not very strong in Poland or Hungary. As you see on the map, though, where the refugees are going, and these numbers are several weeks old, is certainly increased. But we do have a good presence in both Slovakia and Romania. And I'm delighted to report that we are providing assistance in both of those places. The Romanians especially, I've had the pleasure several years ago of meeting some of them. They've been helping on the border. This man here is actually the pastor of the parish in Turk, Romania. And the people have been very generous. But the needs in terms of our actual assistance at this time are very limited. And some of you probably read my letter several weeks ago telling people not to designate funds directly to Romania. Or excuse me, to Ukraine or even refugees, but to make them to the general fund so we have flexibility. Even in these areas where the society is working, they've only asked for 5,000 or 10,000 euros, which we certainly have provided immediately to them. We've also provided some assistance through what an organization called DePaul International, which is part of the family, and there's some great stories there. But a lot of the resources they need right now are actually coming from the communities right there. I was at a meeting in Paris a week ago where actually our Commission on Disaster and Aid had a meeting, as well as the Twinning Commission. And the woman who's in charge of this area of Europe is very knowledgeable. She's actually works at NATO, and her comments were that many of the people that are being refugees are transitioning through these areas, but they're not staying. And we find actually that very many of them do have family and friends scattered throughout Europe, and they're going to stay with them, but they really do want to go back home. So we don't have the refugee camps that we do have had, what we've seen in other areas of crisis. They're not the same. But I think that it has also been instructive in terms of what the society needs to do to prepare and how we respond. Now, this chart it describes some of what we call the Commission on International Aid and Disaster does. And you can see only 21% of the funds we give, and this is across the board throughout the world, are responding to the immediate disasters. And this is true in the United States too. We're often not really first providers. But the biggest portion, 60% of what we do, happens after the disaster. And we feel this probably is going to be the same in Ukraine. The relief and the things that the society can do is probably going to be afterwards, after people get home, or is going to go on for years and years. It's not what's on the news right now. And this is true in all disasters. We also do some with developing infrastructure, and we do some with leadership training. So this is a quick screenshot of where the assistance goes, and we expect it's going to be the very same in Europe for this current crisis. The needs will go on for years and years. Some of it might be in other countries like France and Germany and Poland, where people will be providing assistance. And some of it may be, if God willing, people ever go back to Ukraine. So one of the other very important things, I need to say this over and over again, is we should not respond with money designated to a limited thing just because it's in the news, for two reasons. One is sometimes we end up orphaning funds for causes that exceed the capacity of the society in those locations to use the money. To that point, at our meeting in Paris, we identified over 600,000 euros that is orphaned for previous disasters where people sent money where there was no understanding of how it would be used. This is in places like the Philippines where there were hurricanes and typhoons, places like Nepal that had big earthquakes, places like Indonesia, where the society in some of those areas wasn't very strong, and or they didn't ask for as much money as got sent. So what happens to that money is it's very difficult then to put it back into general use. So please follow our advice. Send money only through National Council too. Do not send money directly to Paris. We had one council, God bless them, they sent a check for $5,000 directly to Paris. It will probably, with banking fees, take almost 10% of that. Much better to send it to the National Council, which is what the twinning structure is. And we can wire transfer the whole amounts much cheaper, because the other issue with some of these issues is a matter of homeland security and banking rules. So it gets very complex. I bring all that up, though, mostly to look at our ability going forward to build the capacity. And part of that is to do twinning. And some of you, God bless you, are generous with twinning, but I think the United States still could do more. We're specifically twinned with the Western Hemisphere, Latin America, and a few other heritage sites. But a lot of the need in Europe at this point is being taken care of by places with twins. Ireland and Wales, for instance, are twins with Slovakia and have been helping them out. So we could do a little bit more twinning, work with Elizabeth in the national office. There are structures in place. But it really pointed out to me this issue of capacity. Where the disaster hits, where there's poverty, if the society isn't strong in those places, if we haven't built a strong network to serve, we are unable to provide the assistance that we want to be able to provide. So that's also in the US, it's not just foreign. And I think, for instance, in the United States, we've exactly met that need. Building capacity to serve in terms of disasters in the US by the structuring of the Disaster Service Corporation. We're the only country in the world that has something like this, something that is able to step in when something happens in a particular locale with the expertise and a network that comes from not just that area, but from across our entire country. So thank you for the support for that. It's a growing concerned, still going through some rough spots, but I think we're well on our way to creating, at least with disasters, some of that capacity. But I think that it's an issue everywhere in our societies as we come out of COVID and experience some of the things that are going on. We need to look at this issue. And here's a copy of the strategic plan phase 2. I hope some of you have seen it. It's built around our mission statement with 5 focus areas, each with a element or a focus on one part of our mission plan. So expanding and strengthening that network of charity and encouraging and supporting Vincentians on their spiritual journey. Those are the inward focusing, the internal focusing parts of the plan. And I think that's what I want to talk about mostly tonight. On the other side are external things that are all very important. But again, if we don't have the capacity, if we're not given ourselves the ability to meet the needs, you see on the left side of the screen, we aren't going to be able to do the things on the right side of the screen. So I want to just talk a little bit about that this evening. I want to focus on 4 areas in terms of that capacity to serve. Leadership. We go nowhere unless we've got good leaders, strong leaders that can organize. Growth and revitalization, fundraising and development, and finally communications and branding. I want to just spend a little time on each of those and encourage all of you in your conferences and your councils to accept this challenge to grow and strengthen our network of charity. Let's start with leadership. In terms of our society, I think this is one of the challenges we have, and it's been identified frequently by the governance committee, by some of your council leadership. Many of us joined the society to serve people. We didn't join to become president someday or take an office in the society. We joined because we wanted to live out the gospel calling to serve those in need. And we then found the friendship and the spirituality, but we need to more clearly see that one of the ways to serve is not just serving the poor, but to serving our fellow Vincentians by accepting roles of leadership. And we have a lot of people in our organization that have leadership roles in many other parts of their life, but they're reluctant to accept them within the society. Frederick Ozanam, when they were looking for the next president to follow Mani Bai, amongst many things, he said he observed that our society's leaders must join the zeal that founds with the prudence that preserves. And I think that's a clear statement of what we need to do as leaders. One of my very first talks after being elected president was to talk about zeal. And I think that we all can be more accepting or more engaged in being zealous about our society. We love the society. We need, though, to take that zeal and get other people to also embrace this vocation. But we also need that prudence that preserves. That's a wonderful balancing between those two. So we've been over the years, going back to Gene Smith, working on strategic planning, and very often that planning was to give the resources to our members to be servant leaders. So on the left side there are 3 different points that we need to pay close attention to. The first is to plan succession. We need to be looking right now for who's the next president, who's the next home visit leader or trainer, who's your next formators, who's in line even to run the Christmas giveaway program that you may have in your conference. Plan for succession. Ask someone to be your assistant if you have one of those jobs. And as you see with the National Council presidency, even though you've got me for another 1.5 years as your national president, we're already starting to look for who is the next president. And that process for election will begin with candidates giving talks at the next meeting in Baltimore. And by this time next year, you will know who your next National Council president is. We know that on the national level, we need to do that, but you need to do that at your conference level. And there's things you can do to position people to succeed. Training is important for leaders too. I've seen too often people have assumed leadership roles and just been kind of left out to drift, not having had adequate training. The society runs itself differently than the Home and School Association or the Parish Council or the Rotary Club or whatever other organization that you may have belonged to. So it's important that we provide training for our leaders. Also, the mentoring, to find people that have had similar positions. And we have a national mentoring program for council leaders and executive directors, but you may also want to develop something like that locally, where you find someone that has a similar position, maybe not in your council, maybe from somewhere else, that can then step in and just be a voice to talk things through. Some things on the right there are tools and resources. Attended invitation for renewal. When we do this in person, I ask people to raise their hands, and it's delightful to see how many people in the room have attended invitation for renewal. It's a program for future and current leaders. Sign up for the National Mentoring Program. Also, there's great governance training, both at national meetings and these regional meetings. And so attend those and make sure you incorporate them into the meetings. And finally, there's a lot of resources on our website. If you haven't been to the national website recently, it's worth looking at it. The website has been redone with a lot of changes made. In the past, it's been really difficult to navigate that website, I know, but we've done a lot to make those resources a lot more available. There's some great videos. Some of them were videos of things that were workshops that were done at past national meetings. Some of them during this COVID time, we've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings with great training. One little hint I'll give you on that national website, if you go to it, see this V up here in the corner, I circled it in red. If you click on that, you will come to a wealth of videos that are organized on various topics. It's kind of hidden away there, but those are videos. And on that, you'll find, here's a set of just one, this is just a screen capture of some of the videos that we have available to us. Servant leadership, our vocation, 7 duties of a conference president, 5 goals of a conference president, effective conference meetings. Each one of those are done by some of our best trainers around the country. So you can, after dinner, click on it. You don't need to go anywhere to use these resources. You don't need to fly anywhere, and you can view them at your own leisure. I strongly encourage you, even if you're not currently a leader, but you're thinking of it, it's worth looking at these. And of course, we have all the traditional things. All the documents are there too. Many of them, you don't need to buy something. You don't need to go right to St. Louis for your access to them. You can just download them. And again, you can use them to develop yourself. Also, if you have a conference or a council, some of the videos it might be a good thing you can do for one of your meetings or for one of your retreats. You can do it as a group and have someone just lead some discussion. So we need to develop good leadership within our society. Otherwise, we aren't going to advance our goals at all. The next area is growth and revitalization. We used to call this the Extension Committee, a good Catholic word, but most people didn't know what it meant. So the committee very early under my term, it renamed itself to the Growth and Revitalization. And it points out that it isn't just a matter of growing more. We need to revitalize ourselves. So even way back in the earliest days, though, Frederick Ozanam wrote a friend this. He said, "We fulfill our duties from habit. We carry out our good works by routine, but no more the enthusiasm, the rays of charity, which at the beginning came sometimes to illuminate and warm our souls. To try to renew our forces, we are going to attempt some reforms. Much has been discussed, but I fear it will accomplish little." I hope you're more optimistic than Blessed Frederick was. Of course, Frederick really didn't believe that, and they went on, of course, to do it. But it does point out right from the start how easy it is to just get in a rut, to do the same things over and over, to not engage new people, to just do things by force of habit. And if we want to attract new people, if we want to get diverse people working with us, young people, or other people that just may show some interest, we need to be constantly adapting and changing and reforming. So let's make sure that we're paying attention to this important part of growing and revitalizing. And again, there's some great resources that the Society has. I hope you find on our internet. One of the things that's going to be getting a lot of attention starting this summer, and certainly by our meeting in Baltimore, is revisiting the standards of excellence. Some of you may remember, maybe 10 years ago or so, we spent a lot of time using the standards of excellence, which in many ways are just the minimum requirements to have a healthy council or conference. So we'll be looking at those, but encourage you when those get rolled out later this year to use them as a tool to do almost a self-examination to see if you're on track as a conference and council. The Growth and Revitalization Committee has revised the invitation to serve with the pulpit talks and the things that go in the bulletin. It's going to be in Spanish as well as English. And so please use that tool. One of the things that is important about the invitation to serve too is it gives a roadmap that you can share with your pastor. So the pastor knows what you're going to be doing if they give you permission to start that process in your parish. And finally, there's some new formation resources on the website. The Growth and Revitalization Committee, too, for those of you who are really keenly interested in this, they have regular monthly meetings, a community of practice that gets on and just shares their own best practice. And so someone presents maybe just a 10-minute presentation. Jeannie Harper's done a great job with these. And if you are interested in this area, I'd strongly encourage you to look at the resources that are there. So we also we need to strengthen ourselves, as I was talking in the last part of my talk, but we also need to look to grow into areas, first, where we're not present or where the church is growing. We find parts of our country in the north and the east, the parishes are collapsing, they're combining, and so we have conferences combining, but there are whole other areas of the country, and some of them in your region, where the church is growing. They're building new churches. And so some of those places where they build a new church, the society's not there unless we go investigate and encourage a pastor to start it. So we've got opportunities there to grow, and we have to pay attention to that. And we certainly need to pay attention to where we have increased Hispanic Catholic presence. I think your region's doing a lot for encouraging these efforts, and we know we need to do more. And the National Council has some initiatives that want to make sure we're paying attention to that important opportunity and actually necessity to grow the vocation of Ascensions within the Hispanic Catholic population. And so looking ahead for our strategic plan for growth, a couple of things that are being initiated. One is to more and more maybe to look at new conference models. And we've asked our governance committee to explore that some, but we may need to find other models besides just the parish conference. Some places, maybe we even need two conferences in the parish. That's not uncommon around the world in some places. They have neighborhood conferences. Now we have to get the pastor to understand that. You know, some places, maybe the older members want to keep having their meetings during the daytime, but we know young people can't make it. So sometimes maybe we need two conferences, one that meets in the evenings and one that meets at some other time of the day. I was a Rotary member for a number of years. And one of the things that occurred in our community was there was a young professionals Rotary group that formed, and believe it or not, they met Sunday nights, actually in the back room of a bar. But they found that for that group of people, you know, Friday night was date night, and Saturday they were having activities, and Monday they went back to work, and many of them were all over the place in terms of their work. But they found no one was scheduling anything Sunday night. So we might need to look at new models of how we do things to attract diverse people and young people. There's also, we might need to look for new ways to get extension teams in a region, and the National Council may have to look for some funding, and our regions may have to look for some funding, because we have whole dioceses where we're not present in, or places in our own current diocese where we have some presence. Maybe there's a far corner of the diocese that we're not present. That's certainly true in my own diocese. There's one corner of the diocese where we're not present at all, but it's a 2-3 hour trip to go back and forth there. So we might need to find some ways to fund that. We may also have to find regional teams to do some of this extension. And finally, my final point is that we might need to find some things to do that. So let's not feel boxed in by what our current resources and models are to build that strong council and conference. The third area I want to talk about or look about is in our capacity to serve is fundraising and development. No one wants to talk about money necessarily, but it's certainly an important part of our ability to create a strong network with capacity to serve. So let's listen to St. Vincent.
Very well, tell her I'll take them. Well, what are we going to give them? Soup and bread? What bread? The soup, and perhaps a prayer when their stomachs are full.
Father DePaul.
What do you want?
There's no more wood and the fire's going out.
Well, what's happened to it? I mean, do you eat it?
I put the pieces on one at a time like you said to economize.
Well, carry on with some prayers. We seem to have plenty of those. I'll get the wood. Money. Money. I must get money. Without money in this world, one can't do anything.
I'm always amused by that. And of course, they really weren't filming St. Vincent de Paul, but it's from the movie Monsieur Vincent, the French film. You feel like you actually are walking with St. Vincent himself as you watch this. But Vincent de Paul himself was very keenly aware that he had to engage donors, people with capacity to support the charities he had, and we need to too. Sometimes we don't feel like it's part of our vocation, or somehow it's an unworthy part of it. But it's important that we're asking for the sake of the poor. We're not asking for ourselves. The money, the funds we get, really build the financial capacity to serve. Our St. Vincent de Paul's have been blessed with good resources in many of our councils. I've just outlined some of where those funds come from. Parish contributions, just for conferences especially, are very often a main part of support. And we need to be a little bit worried about that, as some parishes coming out of COVID, people weren't attending. Some pastors may be less generous with parish funds than they have been in the past. So we need to make sure we're keeping good relationships with our parish, letting them know what we do, good relationships with the pastor, but also we need to diversify our funds and our funding sources. Those of us blessed with thrift stores know that they can be a wonderful source of income, not for everyone, but if they are managed correctly, they can not only give good items to those in need, but also support us financially. And there are other things like direct mail, a very important fundraising tool for many councils and conferences. And there is a national direct mail program for the startup costs are shared. And there's a formula for that. And if you don't have a direct mail program in your council, I'd strongly encourage you to investigate that with our national office. There are events which have been suffering, obviously, coming out of COVID. They're tough events. And there's grants and there's bequests. So a diversified fundraising strategy is important. And many of us had one set of funding, be it thrift stores or parish contributions. But as the geography changes, we need to be diversifying it. Now, again, I'd like to point out there's some great resources available on the national site about fundraising. And Ryan Carney from the national office has been doing monthly meetings with not just the professional fundraisers, but anyone in a conference or council who's interested can be on one of these calls. And they're great sharings of resources and ideas. So please use these resources. We have spent in the last 3 years a lot of effort making sure our thrift stores continue to thrive. It's a different world in many of our places in terms of what thrift stores do. And so we've hired a national store director. We've developed some model practices. We have a resolution in terms of starting and folding stores. We've formed a national store corporation, and we do have a store in Phoenix. Thank you for letting us do that, to be a model place and a training place. So please use these resources. Let us know if your store is hurting or if you want to have a better operation. There's no sense in not asking for the help. And we've assisted multiple stores across the country already go from being barely profitable to even losing money to actually being profitable. And now some of them are model stores really for us. I also bring up maybe a difficult subject. A lot of us don't want to ask for money, or it's difficult. For years, the fundraising world's talked about this transfer of wealth as we baby boomers are going to move on and transfer wealth. It's the biggest transfer of wealth in history. And there's a lot of conversation about how nonprofits will or maybe won't benefit from that, but we need to at least be having a plan to ask people to put us in their will. And I ask each of you also to consider putting something for the society in your will. I've annoyed some people by bringing this up, but let me do it maybe so someone in your council doesn't have to do it. But if we don't love our society, if we don't value it enough to be funding it, why would anyone else? We need to be our models first. And many times people have not communicated their interest to their own families. And sometimes I've heard the stories several times in my own council where someone who was a council president even, or very active and central their whole career. And when you read the memorials or the obituary, the obituary or the memorials are telling them to send the money maybe to a hospice care or some charity that they've never really participated in. So don't be bashful about asking for money. It's, again, you're doing it for the poor. And if we don't have the funds to help with the needs we see, which are overwhelming, we really will be not building this network with a capacity to serve. Moving on then to the last area, communication and branding. We're not very good at this as for most of us. I know we've got some model councils on this out there in this region, and so some do this well. But as a whole, the society really needs to continue to work on giving a message of, one is who we are and what we do. And so again, the National Council does have some great resources, and we're getting better at that. I hope you are too. And we've got a new chair for the Communications Committee, and actually co-chairs will be hopefully continuing to work on this area. Many years ago, I was at one of our national meetings, and one of the guest speakers was Monsignor, who was the head of the Office of Communications at the Vatican. He was an American, but he was came and he gave a talk. And one of the things I still remember, he said, "You members of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, you're really good at that part of the gospel that says if you do charity, you shouldn't let your left hand know what the right hand is doing." He said. Anyway, I said, but you absolutely forgot about the part that says, don't put your light under a bushel. You're terrible at that. And I think it is true, because we do have this element of humility, which is absolutely crucial. But again, it isn't for us. If our pastor doesn't know what we're doing, if our parish doesn't know what we're doing, if our store donors don't know how their donations are being used, they easily could shift it to some other organization. And very often those organizations, quite frankly, don't do as good a job as we do in using those resources. So create a plan for it. Not only who we are, but what we do. And again, we're not bragging, but we have a tough time at the national office even getting your annual reports in. So it's tough to be able to get the data together to say who we are and what we're doing. I remember at one point in Madison, Wisconsin, the Salvation Army had a difficult time. They closed their food pantry, and front page of the newspaper said, "Oh, what are the poor going to do? The Salvation Army closed their food pantry." Well, the fact of the matter is this: the society was doing 3 or 4 times more than the Salvation Army ever did in terms of food distribution. But I didn't fault the newspaper, the Salvation Army. I knew it was us who were failing to make sure the community knew, not in a bragging way, but in a way that told the story of who the support we need and how the resources are being used. So make sure you create a plan to share that in a meaningful way. I want to wrap up then by talking a bit about what we need to continue to keep a focus. And we may have adjusted during these times of the pandemic to finding ways to be creative and inventive, as St. Vincent de Paul says, to serve the poor. We're creative to infinity, but we need to get back to some of the basics too, of person-to-person contact, home visits that are in person, done in pairs. St. Vincent Frederick gave this address actually to one of the times where he actually presided over the Council General meeting in Paris. This is part of his talk. He said, "We profess to believe that the science of welfare reform is learned less in books and parliamentary debates than by climbing up the floors of the poor man's house." So those are where we really rooted in terms of our vocation. It's what has been my school of charity. And I want to just maybe end by telling 3 stories. You all have your stories too, but they're stories about the people that were my school of charity, and they really gave me the lessons of welfare or charity. The first was a street alcoholic, Tim Garrett. I had a Catholic bookstore for many years in Center City, and it was above a grocery store. And Tim came in, he was a street alcoholic, and he's a big guy. He came in, he said, "Well, you're a Christian. I know that because you have this store, and because you're a Christian, you've got to give me food. So I want you to go downstairs and buy me a sandwich," which I did. And the next day he showed up with 3 friends, and before you knew it, my bookstore turned into a sandwich center. And I had grade school kids making sandwiches for me. And eventually we started a major meal program in the community based on those sandwiches. And Tim always thought he was one of the founders of that meal program. And to some degree, he might have been. But the first day we opened a meal program, though, was at a church basement. And we had it all planned out, and people brought food from their churches, and they volunteered, and they ate with the guests. Well, afterwards, Tim came up to us, and he gave us a critique. And one of the things we did is we had people coming in one front door, and then so as not to mix the outgoing people with the line and have noise, we had them going out the back door. And that was one of the things he said, he found offensive. He says, "Great program you have here. Yeah, you're making bums go out the back door because you're embarrassed." Sometimes he would just, one of his favorite phrases is, "Yeah, making bums jump through hoops again for sandwiches." But he had a kernel of truth in it, as offensive and abrasive as he could be sometimes. He also brings out the point, we don't ask the poor enough about how we can serve them. We don't share our plans with them. We don't evaluate our services enough with them. They really can be instructing us and partners in providing the assistance to the communities. That was one of the things I learned from someone. Another woman I remember from the times that I ran our stores was a woman named Mary. Mary was older. She'd be leaning on her shopping carts. People would see her coming and they'd kind of go to the corners because she always had something to complain about. The food we gave her from the food pantry, she didn't like the choices she had, or there wasn't enough of it. When we gave her free clothes, there weren't enough in her size or the styles she wanted. There was always something that Mary was going to come up and complain about. But I'd listen to her, and she had her charm of her own, let's just say. One day she came up to me, and she had a smirk on her face, and she says, "Ralph, I've been thinking a lot, and I've come to understand myself." She says, "God gave me the gift of poverty so that I could complain." Well, how do you not love a woman who has that understanding of who she really is? No, unlike Tim, she really didn't have that many suggestions I ever wanted to hear. But she did enjoy complaining, and we had a relationship that I grew to appreciate over the years. Third person I want to bring up, and there's several people that fit this category, but there's one particular woman, Denise, who came Christmas Eve day, like we were closing around noon, and she showed up at 11 o'clock. Kids sleeping in the car, no place to go, no home, and it was just feeling very badly Christmas, not being able to have someplace with her family. And told her whole story, and that's not the important part. But after listening to her and listening to what she had as options, I didn't have anything I knew that I could offer or suggest for her to help for that day, that night, that next week even. As you know, at that point, I've been doing this work 25 years. I knew the resources as well as anyone else in the city, but it really made me realize that that was my poverty too. And sometimes all we can do is say, I don't know. You know, I wish I did. And it can sound hollow sometimes, say, oh, I'll pray for you. It wasn't a matter of me saying no or yes. I just didn't have an answer for her. And so sometimes working with the poor, we can see our own poverties, our own lack of resources, the poverties of our community, the poverties of our own imagination. So there's all examples of the way I learned to accept this vocation. Wasn't by the great Ozanam orientation or all the wonderful videos I just told you about that are on the national website. We need to make sure as we come out of this COVID that we are walking up the stairs of the poor person's house, that we're listening to them one-on-one. And I know you all do that, and I encourage you to find new people to because that's what they will be drawn into this vocation. I saw several people that I invited to be part of society. And it wasn't until they did a home visit or two that they were really drawn in to say, oh, this is why I'm doing it. It might not just be a home visit. It might be helping people in a food pantry, but it might be some homeless operation, but it's the person-to-person contact. We need to make sure it's always front and center about who we are and what we do. Wanted to encourage all of you to consider coming to Baltimore. It's on the opposite coast, they know, but we really want to have a great crowd in Baltimore. We will renew our friendships, our spirituality. There'll be good workshops. Our international president, Renato, will be with us at that meeting. We've got some other great things planned for you that'll be coming out. The registration will probably be coming out in about a month. So please find the money. Again, invest in the money. As I said in my last newsletter column, that sometimes if you're looking for people to take roles, pay their way to a meeting like this. At some point they will get excited about what they see. If they just stick their head above the work of your council and conferences, they will see the bigger society and grow to love it as you all do. Finally, leave you with something that Blessed Frederick Ozanam wrote to his friend Auguste L'Italian Day after they separated into separate cities. It says, as each of us grows older, may we also grow in friendship, piety, and zeal for good. And that's my wish for each of you as individuals and for our society, that we may grow in our friendship and our holiness and our zeal for good. Thank you all. I look forward to seeing you somewhere along the line in person, but please continue the good work and enjoy all of the other speakers that you're going to be blessed with in the days ahead.